I was busy under the hood of my car, hands slick with grease, when I heard the unmistakable click of high heels on the concrete. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The perfume gave her away before she even spoke. Damn, you're a hard man to track down, Catherine said, her tone sharp but casual, like this was just another day. I didn't bother turning around, just grunted and kept working. Guess that says more about you than me. She let out a small huff, her heels echoing as she wandered around the garage. So, this is what you do now? I glanced around at the cluttered workbench, the oil-streaked floor, and the half-dismantled carburetor. Yeah, I could see why she wasn't impressed. What did you expect, a penthouse and a butler? I muttered. Closing the hood with a clang, I wiped my hands on a rag, grabbed my flask and a couple of plastic mugs from the bench, and poured coffee into both. Turning around, I handed her one. Here. I ain't a fan of yours, but my mama didn't raise me to be rude to visitors. Catherine took the cup like it might bite her, holding it delicately by the rim. You didn't used to be so finicky, I said, smirking. She ignored the jab. I was hoping we could have a conversation. You, me, and James. That got my attention. I stopped mid-sip and stared at her. You really thought I'd sit down nice and comfy with that son of a bitch? I asked, genuinely baffled. She frowned. We could have had a civilized conversation. Worked things out properly. I barked out a laugh, more bitter than amused. Civilized? He'd have to work my boot out of his butthole first. That slimy maggot, well, you know what he is. By preference, I wouldn't even breathe the same air as him. I'm mostly ashamed we both need oxygen. Andrew. She sighed, that exasperated tone I remembered too well. It used to signal the start of one of her pleas for me to be reasonable. What? I shot back. That slimy eel took advantage of my generosity, greased up my wife, slid her under him, and my family right along with her. Then he oiled up my company and slid that out from under me too. Her face tightened, but she pressed on. If you don't have to roll in the mud, why would you want to? I raised an eyebrow at that. Thought you enjoyed rolling in the mud. Seemed like you loved getting down and dirty with James, muddying up my bed and all. Her face went white as a sheet. I wondered why she looked so shocked. After 5 years, did it even matter anymore? You knew? She asked, her voice shaky. You saw us? I nodded, taking another sip of my coffee. I never meant for you to find out that way, she said softly. She sounded sincere, but then again, lying came as naturally to her as breathing. I tilted my head, genuinely curious. Oh yeah? What way would you've preferred I find out you're a cheatin' skank? She brushed at her skirt, avoiding my gaze like it'd burn her, probably buying time to think of something to say. And you thought we could sit down, sip tea, and have a friendly chat or something? Did James steal your brain along with your promises? I shook my head, letting out a dry laugh. Shit, now you got me all antsy. 5 years I've been pretty damn happy, and here y'all come, stirring up trouble again. Her lips parted like she was about to speak, but I cut her off. I'll tell you right now, I ain't giving you money. I ain't giving you shit. You already took everything I had, spent it, and now you can go suck it up. Catherine's expression softened, like she pitied me. That look crawled under my skin. Andrew, I didn't come here to ask for money, she said quietly. Then her gaze swept around the garage and landed back on me, sitting in the middle of all this mess. She waved a hand as if that explained everything. I mean, so why the hell are you here? I snapped. She exhaled slowly, as if summoning patience. Andrew, you just ran off. I didn't know where you'd gone or why. You didn't leave a note, a message, nothing. You just took a few clothes and some odds and ends, and that was it. I folded my arms, leaning back against the car. Odds and ends? Huh? I snorted. You got that right. Better odds than you thought. Her brows furrowed, but I didn't give her time to interrupt. No, I didn't just run off, I said, spitting the words back at her like they tasted bad. I considered my options, decided what I wanted, and did it. Weren't no running involved. You make it sound like I was scared or someone ran me off. Shit, I didn't like it, but with you out of the picture, all I had to think about was me for once. She opened her mouth, but I kept going. Thought about leaving a note, I said, my tone mocking, but I reckon it'd have just said, Dear Catherine, you're a cheating, lying, thieving 304. Have a shitty life. Bye. But even that felt like a waste of paper. Her face twisted, half angry, half shocked. I was never a thief. She shot back, all indignant. I let out a sharp laugh. Well, you didn't deny the rest of it, now, did you? Her mouth clamped shut, and I leaned forward, looking her dead in the eye. See, I've had all the proof I needed. After that slimy bastard shafted me and stole my company, I went out, got drunk out of my mind, trying to process the fact that everything I worked for was gone. Meanwhile, he was back at my house celebrating by screwing my wife in my bed. I saw her flinch, but I didn't care. The memory burned too hot to stop now. When I found you two like that, hell, I should have done something, right? A better man would have gone ballistic, maybe thrown punches, or called the cops. But me? I just stood there, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. Rage, bitter, absolute rage, was fighting with this overwhelming sense of defeat. My voice dropped, low and steady. So, I walked away, just turned and left. 'Cause I knew the alternative. 2 graves and a life sentence, or maybe the chair. And you know what? You weren't worth it. Yeah? Then how come you and that maggot brother of mine now own the family business? A business I worked my butt off for. Blood, sweat, and tears, that was me. She had the decency to look embarrassed, which was rare for Catherine. I wasn't involved in that, she muttered, shifting uncomfortably. That was your parents, Andrew. They said it was good for business. I barked a laugh, sharp and humorless. Good for business? Nah, that wasn't any business I'd ever wanted to be part of. Let's be real. You slept with my brother. My parents knew. Hell, their golden boy was screwing the wife of their so-called slave son. And you know what? Not a damn one of them cared. They just closed ranks, made sure the prodigal son came out on top. I shook my head, letting the anger roll out slow and steady. Yeah, golden boy with his golden tongue. That was more important to them than the guy breaking his back for the family. So yeah, sure, I bet it was great for business. Look, she spluttered, her voice rising like she was scrambling to regain control. I didn't come here to talk about that. She straightened, trying to pull her dignity back around her like a tattered coat. No, I don't imagine you did, I said, my voice calm now, almost cold. But see, there's a funny thing about getting cheated on and deciding to just walk away. It hurts like hell, but you learn a few things along the way, and you figure out what's worth your time and what isn't. Her eyes darted to the floor, her lips pressing into a thin line. But I didn't care. I'd made my peace with the past, mostly. She didn't get to come waltzing in here, dragging it all back up like I owed her something. So, I said, crossing my arms, if you're not here to talk about that, let's cut the crap. What do you want, Catherine? It's about Logan and Maria, she said, her tone casual, like we were chatting over coffee. What about him? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Andrew, they miss you. Your children miss you. They can visit me here if they want, I said with a shrug. The way her eyes flicked over my clothes and the garage told me that wasn't an option she cared to entertain. Too beneath her, I supposed. They want you to be a bigger part of their lives, she pressed, as if I hadn't said a word. Her voice had that rehearsed quality now, like she was reciting lines from a script. They need more stability, and they need you around. But if you can't play as big a part as you might wish, then we have to find a different way of providing that. I raised an eyebrow. And what might a different way be? We were thinking that James could adopt them, she said, rushing the words out like she was trying to rip off a Band-Aid. And before you go off the deep end, think about it. It makes sense. He's there for them every day, and together, he and I are the parents they need. This is about the children, Andrew, not you and me or James and me. It's purely about the children. Trust me, I'm their mother, and I only want what's best for them. I stared at her for a moment, then leaned back against the workbench. What grade Maria get in math last term? I asked. What? You being her ma, and so close and everything. Thought you might want to brag her marks up to me some. Show me what a good job y'all doing. She blinked, clearly thrown off. Look, I don't want to talk about the children's schooling. They're both doing very well, so you needn't worry. Nah, I ain't worried, I said, shaking my head. They smart kids. They'll get by with a little help. Yes, that's what I'm talking about, she said, seizing on my words like a lifeline. But what would really help is for James to adopt them and take over the tedious part of looking after them. I felt the blood drain from my face as her words sank in. Tedious? That's what she called raising our kids. Tedious. My hands curled into fists at my sides, but I forced myself to keep calm. You got a hell of a nerve, Catherine, I said slowly, coming in here, talking about my kids like they're chores to hand off to someone else. Like I'm just some obstacle in the way of your happy little family with James. Her face tightened, but I didn't care. She could dress it up however she wanted, but I wasn't about to hand over my children to the man who'd stolen everything else from me. Look, she said, her voice sharpening, James is a successful, well-respected man who is a fine role model for the children. Whereas you, I'm sure you're doing your best, but let's face it, you're not much. You have nothing. To put it bluntly, you are nothing. She said it like it was a fact, like I'd melt under the weight of her judgment. James wanted to help out. She continued, and I have a check for $5,000 in my bag. Take it. Use it to get yourself together again. Give your children and yourself a chance to get ahead in life. I leaned back against the workbench, crossing my arms, and looked at her. Well, I said slowly, I surely appreciate your generous offer, Catherine, but I'm happy enough right here with my garage. It's all I want right now. I let my words hang in the air for a beat before leaning in slightly. And I don't need or want to sell my children. Her face flushed with frustration, but she didn't respond right away. I could see she was struggling to keep her composure, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. Andrew, that's not what this is about, she said finally, her voice tight. I'm trying to do what's best for Logan and Maria. You could at least consider their future. I shook my head, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. Their future? I said. Funny how y'all only think about their future when it suits you. But I reckon their future's a hell of a lot better with a father who actually loves them for who they are, not for what's convenient or looks good in front of the neighbors. Her mouth opened to respond, but I held up a hand. Nah, don't bother, Catherine. I know exactly where I stand with you, and that snake you married. You can keep your check. And you can tell James that if he thinks he can buy my kids, he's got another thing coming. I was just about to pour myself another cup of coffee when a man in a crisp black suit stepped into the garage. He looked entirely out of place among the grease-streaked tools and faint smell of engine oil. His polished shoes didn't so much as pick up a speck of dust as he approached me with purpose. Mr. Miller, he said, bowing slightly, his voice calm and professional. The Prime Minister of Japan is on the line. He's awaiting your response regarding the Osaka project. I gave Catherine a glance out of the corner of my eye. Her face was a mix of confusion and disbelief. Her lips slightly parted like she was trying to catch up with what was happening. Turning back to the suited man, I nodded. Bring it over, I said simply. He handed me a sleek, high-tech phone, and I brought it to my ear. Prime Minister Takahashi, I said warmly, leaning casually against the workbench as if this were just another day in my life. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I've reviewed the proposal, and I think we're aligned on the key points. But I'd like to ensure we maintain our commitment to sustainable practices. That's non-negotiable for me. Once we iron out that detail, we're good to move forward. I listened as the Prime Minister responded, his tone respectful and accommodating. Catherine's eyes widened as I spoke, shifting her weight uneasily. She clearly hadn't expected this. Excellent, I said after a moment, a confident smile playing on my lips. Then we're in agreement. I'll have my team follow up with yours to finalize the timeline. Thank you for your trust, Prime Minister. I look forward to our partnership. I handed the phone back to the suited man, who bowed again before stepping away. I turned back to Catherine, her expression now veering into outright disbelief. Before she could say a word, another man appeared, this one holding a folder and a clipboard. He was dressed in business casual, but his demeanor was just as professional. Mr. Miller, he said, we need your signature to finalize the purchase of the new factory land. The total is $20 million, and we need to close by the end of the day. Got it, I said, taking the clipboard and flipping through the papers. I scanned them quickly, grabbed a pen from the man's pocket, and signed with a flourish. Make sure the team starts planning the groundbreaking ceremony. And let the architects know I want something iconic for this one. We're setting the standard here. The man nodded. Understood, sir. I'll handle it immediately. He walked away, leaving Catherine staring at me like she didn't recognize the man standing before her. Something on your mind? I asked, casually taking another sip of my coffee. She blinked, her voice faltering. You. I didn't know. I shrugged, turning back to my workbench. Guess there's a lot you don't know, Catherine. Funny how life works like that. The sharp sound of heels clicking against the concrete floor drew my attention to the garage entrance. Catherine turned as well, her brows furrowing when she saw the woman walking in. She was stunning, radiant, even, with an air of confidence that could silence a room. Her athletic build was wrapped in a form-fitting leather jacket and jeans, her long hair tied back in a sleek ponytail. She moved with the kind of grace that hinted at strength just beneath the surface. Before I could greet her, she crossed the space with purpose, cupped my face in her hands, and kissed me. It wasn't just a casual peck. It was a kiss that told the world we were together, and she didn't care who saw. Pulling back, she glanced at Catherine, her gaze sharp and assessing. Her lips curled into a smirk as she spoke, her voice dripping with playful disdain. Don't you think that it was too much just buy an entire garage, just so you can play with your car collections? Then she turned towards my ex-wife and said, you said your ex-wife was good-looking. But this? She gestured toward Catherine with a dismissive wave of her hand. This is a malnourished Shrek, minus the green color. Catherine's jaw dropped, her face flushing with a mix of shock and anger. Excuse me? She sputtered, her voice rising. Are you dating her, Marina Nika? She is the current MMA featherweight champion. How is that possible? You're just a worker ant, no better than a slave for the family. How did you trap her? Marina's smirk disappeared as she stepped closer to Catherine, her eyes narrowing. The confidence in her stance made it clear she wasn't someone to mess with. I would have knocked out anyone else for that insult, she said coolly, her voice carrying a warning. But I'll let it slide this time, for Andrew's sake. Next time, though, she leaned in slightly, her tone dropping into something darker, almost dangerous. Next time, I'll rip your tongue out and use it in place of toilet paper. And just to add, he did not trap me. I followed him for weeks before he agreed for a date. He is just amazing. Catherine took an involuntary step back, her face pale as she realized just who she was dealing with. The Marina turned to me, brushing a stray hair off my shoulder like none of this had fazed her. You good, babe? Or do I need to handle this rotten egg for you? I chuckled, shaking my head. I think you've made your point. Let's not give her a heart attack. Catherine opened her mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it, clamping it shut as her eyes darted between us. She clearly didn't know what to say or do. With this new version of me and the powerhouse standing at my side, I leaned back against the desk, folding my arms, my tone dripping with sarcasm. I know you must be shocked at my current situation, I said, emphasizing the words with a smirk. But honestly, you cheating on me with my brother and me leaving the family? Best thing that ever happened to me. Catherine stiffened but said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. The day I found out about your little affair? I continued, my voice calm but laced with bitterness. It was pure chance. Came home early and saw you screwing that maggot. And you know what? I'm a logical man. I didn't kill him, didn't lay a hand on you. Instead, I went to my parents. Thought maybe they'd see reason, thought they'd understand. The bitterness in my voice deepened as I recounted the confrontation. I went to my parents that night, hoping for support, hoping for something. I thought they'd be outraged for me, their son. But the moment I walked into their house, I could see it in their eyes. Not anger, not even disappointment, just weariness, like they were already tired of what I was about to say. I paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment before continuing. I told them everything, every filthy detail. How I came home early to surprise you. How I walked into my own bedroom and saw that. My voice was shaking, my hands trembling as I spilled it all. And you know what my father said? I mimicked his deep, calm tone, laced with indifference. Son, these things happen. You're not the first man to deal with a cheating wife, and you won't be the last. Take the high road. Divorce her if you must, but don't make a scene. I laughed bitterly. Take the high road. Like it was some business transaction. Like you breaking my trust, breaking our vows, was just another item to check off a list. And my mother? She just sat there, wringing her hands, trying to avoid my gaze. I shook my head at the memory. When I asked her what she thought, she finally looked at me and said, "We don't want any trouble, dear. It's best to let it go. These things have a way of working themselves out." Working themselves out? My voice cracked slightly, the bitterness spilling over. Like I was just supposed to turn a blind eye and pretend none of it happened. I leaned forward, my tone low and venomous. I told them I wasn't going to let it slide. I wasn't going to pretend. I wanted justice, answers, at the very least. And do you know what my father did? He sighed. A long, drawn-out sigh, like I was the one inconveniencing him. "Don't make this into a scandal, son," he said. "We have a reputation to think about. Do the right thing. Let her go and move on." I clenched my fists, my knuckles white as the words came out sharper now. It was in that moment I realized they didn't care about me. Not really. They cared about appearances, about keeping the family name untarnished. My pain? My humiliation? It was just collateral damage. Catherine's lips parted as though she wanted to argue, but the weight of my words kept her silent. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, the defiance that once defined her now replaced by guilt and unease. She couldn't look at me, couldn't meet the fire in my eyes. "You don't get to defend them, Catherine," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "You don't get to tell me it wasn't like that. Because it was. They didn't care about me. Hell, they probably never did. Their precious golden boy could do no wrong. And me? I was just the son they tolerated. The one they could throw under the bus whenever it suited them. Catherine shifted again, her shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. Her gaze finally rose to meet mine, but it wasn't defiance I saw there. It was regret. And maybe, just maybe, a flicker of shame. So, yeah, the choice was easy, I continued, my voice steady but sharp as a blade. Stay and be their doormat. Let them manipulate and destroy every part of my life? Or leave. Leave you. Leave them. Leave everything behind. I leaned forward, letting the bitterness seep into every syllable. Because I realized one thing, Catherine. If I'd stayed, if I'd forgiven you, if I'd gone along with their plan, it wouldn't have stopped. My brother would have just found a way to ruin the next woman in my life. And the next. It's what he does. I let the words hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. Not yet. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a near whisper, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. So I broke the cycle, Catherine. I walked away. From you. From him. From all of them. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And you know what? It was the best decision I ever made. Because I don't have to live in their shadow anymore. I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not, just to win their approval. I'm free. Her lip quivered, but she held herself together, though just barely. I didn't know it hurt you that much, she said finally, her voice trembling. You thought wrong. I cut in, my tone slicing through her words. You didn't think at all, Catherine. Not about me. Not about us. You were too busy chasing after him, just like everyone else. And now? I leaned back, crossing my arms as I stared her down. Now, I'm done explaining myself. I don't need you to understand. I don't need you at all. Catherine's shoulders shook, and for a moment, it looked like she might respond. But then she dropped her gaze again, defeated, as silence wrapped around us like a shroud. She stood there, silent, her face pale and unreadable, as if she finally understood just how deep the scars went, and how little power she had left over me. I crossed my arms, a smirk tugging at my lips as I watched Catherine's face. You know, the family always thought I was expendable, I began, letting each word drip with venom. Just the son they could push around, the one who didn't matter, as long as their precious golden boy was happy. Catherine's expression faltered, a flicker of unease crossing her face, but she said nothing. That silence only fueled me further. They made one big mistake, though, I continued, my tone sharp as a blade. They didn't realize I wasn't just the black sheep of the family. I was the smart one. The one who actually owned the patents to most of the tools made by Millers Incorporated. Her eyes widened slightly, the realization dawning on her face. I saw the way her lips parted as if to speak, but I cut her off with a raised hand. Oh, you didn't know? Of course you didn't. While you and James were busy playing house, I was working my butt off, designing, creating, filing those patents under my name. Every wrench, every drill, every custom tool that put Millers on the map, that was me. Not James. Not my father. Me. Catherine's jaw tightened, her silence speaking volumes. I leaned forward slightly, my smirk curling into a wicked grin. So when I left, I didn't just walk away empty-handed. I took the licenses for all those tools with me. And do you know what I did with them? She shook her head faintly, her lips pressed into a thin line. But the curiosity in her eyes betrayed her. I started my own company, I said, leaning back in my chair, relishing the moment. But not just any company. I didn't go crawling to a bank or some corporate investor. No, I found a partner who had, let's just say, unconventional resources. Her brow furrowed in confusion, and I could almost see the wheels turning in her head. I gave her a moment before dropping the bombshell. A Mexican drug lord, I said casually, watching the shock ripple across her face. He wanted to clean up his money, move into legitimate business. And I needed the capital to get started. It was a match made in heaven. Or hell, depending on how you look at it. Catherine's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find the words. You worked with? Relax, I said, waving a hand dismissively. He's retired now, completely legitimate. But back then, he gave me the money I needed to build my empire, and I gave him an investment worth every damn penny. I leaned forward again, my grin sharp as a knife. So while the Millers were busy coddling James, thinking I was just the expendable one, I was building something better, something that's mine. And now, I let the words hang in the air, savoring the weight of them. Now, Millers Incorporated licenses my tools. They pay me royalties. Every single month. Catherine looked like she'd been punched in the gut, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. You planned all of this, she whispered. I chuckled, shaking my head. Planned? No. Survived? Absolutely. I just played the cards I was dealt, and I played them better than anyone ever expected. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, and smirked at Catherine as the weight of my words settled over her. Her jaw dropped slightly, and I could see the disbelief swirling in her wide eyes. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. I gave her a moment to process before I twisted the knife further. 2 years ago, I took away all the licenses, I said, my voice calm but laced with quiet triumph. Every single one. And since then, Miller's Incorporated has been sinking like a rock. Fast. Her lips moved soundlessly for a moment, her face pale with shock. But why? She finally stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed, a humorless sound that made her flinch. Why? Because they deserved it. Every single one of them. Your golden boy James thought he could steal everything from me. My wife, my dignity, my future. My parents thought they could sweep it all under the rug, sacrifice me to keep their favorite son happy. So, I made sure they paid the price. Catherine's hands gripped the edge of her chair, her knuckles white. I could see the gears turning in her mind, the dawning horror as she began to piece it all together. With that initial backing from my, let's say, unconventional partner, and the patented tools I owned, I started poaching their clients one by one. I continued, leaning forward slightly. It wasn't even difficult. Quality speaks for itself. And James? Oh, your precious golden boy? Turns out he can only talk the talk, but can't walk the walk. The man doesn't know the first thing about running a business, let alone keeping clients happy. I shook my head, letting out another humorless chuckle. So, while he was busy playing CEO, I was building something real. Every contract they lost came straight to me. One by one, their empire crumbled, and today, Miller's Incorporated is drowning in debt. They're on the verge of bankruptcy, and your golden boy, James? He ran it into the ground all by himself. Catherine's face twisted, a mix of disbelief and something else, something that almost looked like fear. You destroyed them, she said, her voice trembling. Your own family. My family? I shot back, my tone sharp. You mean the people who betrayed me, humiliated me, and left me for dead? No, Catherine. They stopped being my family the moment they chose him over me. I didn't destroy them. I just let them destroy themselves. I gave them the rope, and James was all too happy to hang himself with it. She stared at me, her eyes searching mine as though trying to find a trace of the man she once knew. And you? You think this makes you better than them? I leaned in closer, my smirk fading into a cold, hard glare. I don't care what it makes me, Catherine. Better, worse, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm free. Free of them, free of you, and free of the life they tried to force me into. I won. And they lost everything. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, swallowing hard. I didn't realize you hated us that much, she whispered. Hate? I repeated, shaking my head slowly. No, Catherine. Hate takes too much energy. I don't hate you. I don't hate James or my parents. I just don't care anymore. You're nothing to me now. Just ghosts of a life I left behind. I leaned back, savoring the look of disbelief on Catherine's face. So, Catherine, you and the family thought I was nothing more than a worker ant. Someone who could be ignored, used, or discarded. But let me tell you something. The ant always knows how to outlast the storm, and this time, the ant had the last laugh. I paused, letting my words hang in the air, watching her struggle to process the revelation. Her confusion was almost palpable, and I pressed on before she could gather herself. Let's talk about the kids, I said, my tone steady yet sharp, with an undercurrent of quiet satisfaction. You've convinced yourself that I abandoned them, that I walked away and disappeared from their lives. But that's where you're wrong. So wrong it's almost laughable. Catherine frowned, her lips twitching as if she wanted to protest, but I raised a hand to stop her. Don't interrupt, Catherine. You'll want to hear this. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze fixed on hers. You know the school they attend? The one you so proudly brag about to everyone? It gets a hefty donation every single year from me. A donation large enough to grant me access to their classrooms, their activities, their progress. For the past 2 years, I've been an integral part of their education, right under your nose. Her eyes widened, the realization dawning on her, but she said nothing. That's right, I continued. my voice unwavering. I've been teaching them, mentoring them, guiding them. I've helped them improve their grades, watched them excel, and celebrated their milestones. Milestones you didn't even know about because you were too busy with your games to notice. Every assignment they aced, every project they completed, every achievement they reached, I was there. Quietly, consistently, and without fail. Catherine's mouth opened, but no words came out. For once, she was utterly speechless. You want to know why their grades suddenly skyrocketed? Why their teachers praised their focus and growth? That wasn't some miraculous change, Catherine. That was me. I've been there for them every step of the way, ensuring they had what they needed to thrive. I leaned back again, my voice calm but cutting. And you, well, you wouldn't know, would you? Because you didn't bother to check. You didn't even notice how much they've changed, how much they've grown. But I did. I've been there for them in ways you never even thought to be. Her expression shifted, a mixture of shock and anger, but I didn't stop. Here's the part you really won't like, I said, my tone hardening. They trust me, Catherine. They confide in me, tell me their dreams, their fears, their struggles. And soon, they'll be here. With me. Not just for visits, but permanently. Because this isn't just about me being a part of their lives. It's about them being where they truly belong. Her face paled, and she shook her head slightly, as though denying what she was hearing. You thought I disappeared, Catherine. You thought I walked away from them like I walked away from you. But the truth is, I've been building a bridge to them this entire time. A bridge you can't tear down, no matter how hard you try. So, keep playing your games, keep clinging to your version of control. Because soon enough, it'll be me who holds all the cards, and them who call this house their home. I let the silence stretch, letting her absorb the full weight of my words. For once, I was the one in control, and there wasn't a single move left for her to make. So, while you were busy making decisions about their future without me, I've been building one for them. A real future, I said, my tone razor sharp. One where they're actually cared for and guided by someone who knows what the hell they're doing, not by people too wrapped up in their egos to notice the damage they're causing. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping as I looked at Catherine. Look at you, all dolled up, playing arm candy for James. Tell me, Catherine, does he make you feel important? Does he make you feel special? I scoffed, waving a dismissive hand before she could even think of answering. Because from where I'm standing, you're just another pretty face he's parading around. A prop. Something to stroke his fragile ego while he hides the fact that he's drowning. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing, but I didn't let up. Oh, don't give me that look. You see, James might be acting like the golden boy, sitting on his little throne, but he's not fooling anyone. At least, not anyone who's paying attention. The debt? It's piling up faster than he can count. And the lies? They're catching up to him. The IRS, the feds, they're circling, Catherine. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. You can't live like a king on borrowed money forever, not without the house of cards crashing down. Catherine's lips parted, her face a mix of anger and confusion, but I didn't give her a chance to speak. And you know what's truly ironic? I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Even the bank's been in on it. They've known all along about the misused funds, the shady deals, the endless lies. But they kept lending him money anyway. Want to know why? I leaned in slightly, my smirk cold and calculating. Because their new majority shareholder has plans. Big plans. Plans to destroy him from the inside. Every loan, every extension, every lifeline he's been handed, it's a rope, Catherine. A rope he's wrapping tighter and tighter around his own neck. Her eyes widened, the realization beginning to dawn. But I wasn't finished. And the best part? I added, leaning back with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He's too arrogant to see it. Too caught up in his own delusions to notice the storm brewing right above his head. So, while he's strutting around like he's untouchable, the walls are closing in. Faster than he can imagine. I let the silence settle, the weight of my words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Catherine stared at me, her face pale, her composure slipping as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. For once, she had no comeback, no sharp retort. And that silence? It spoke volumes. I leaned in closer, locking my gaze with hers, my voice low and steady. But here's the best part, Catherine, I said, savoring the moment. I am that majority stakeholder. That's right, the one pulling all the strings, orchestrating every downfall. And by the time you get back to that so-called home of yours, there won't be one left to return to. The bank's repossessing it as we speak. Your golden castle? It's already crumbled, Catherine. Everything you and James fantasized about, the family legacy, the name, the prestige, obliterated, gone. All that's left is the wreckage. I leaned back slightly, letting my words sink in as I watched her expression shift. The smug confidence she'd worn like a shield just moments ago began to crack, her lips parting slightly as if to protest, but no words came. The creeping dread was all too visible in her wide eyes, and the way her hands fidgeted restlessly. Surprised? I asked, my tone sharp and cutting. You shouldn't be. This didn't happen overnight. While James was busy living in his delusions of grandeur, I was planning every move, making sure each domino was perfectly positioned to fall. And now, the whole house of cards is tumbling down around you. And there's not a damn thing either of you can do to stop it. I let the silence stretch for a moment, the weight of my words pressing down on her. Then I added, my voice dripping with disdain. So, good luck with that, Catherine. But let me make one thing abundantly clear. When the dust finally settles, and you're left standing in the ruins of the life you thought you had, don't even think about coming to me for help. You and James made this mess, and you'll be the ones to live in it. Alone. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but nothing came out. The reality of what I'd said was written all over her face. Shock, fear, and a flicker of desperation she couldn't quite hide. For once, she had no retort, no snide remark. And that silence, her inability to fight back, was more satisfying than any victory speech I could have given. I leaned back, a smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth as I looked at Catherine, watching her expression shift from disbelief to discomfort. Oh, and about my dear, so-called biased parents, I continued, my tone heavy with sarcasm. They're not doing so well either. Their house? Yep, it's being repossessed too. Funny how things come full circle, isn't it? I paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words sink in. And where are they heading, you ask? Straight to James. You know, to their precious golden boy, the one they always thought would fix everything. So, it's his turn now, isn't it? Time for the golden boy to put that golden tongue to use. He's got to figure out how to find everyone a place to live. My parents, Catherine, you, every last one of you. Or, unless he ends up in jail first. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. You see, Catherine, the world's been playing your little family like a fiddle. But now, that same world is turning on James. And soon enough, he'll be left scrambling for a way out, just like the rest of you. So, enjoy the show, because it's about to get really ugly. Real fast. Catherine stood frozen, her face flushed with disbelief as Andrew's words lingered in the air, heavy with menace. You're bluffing, Andrew, she retorted, her voice tight with defiance as she tried to regain her composure. This is all just some game to you. You don't have the power you think you do. With a final, contemptuous glare, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the garage, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. She was determined not to let him have the satisfaction of seeing her crack. She wasn't going to let him win. Not now, not ever. But as she drove up to her home, that hard-fought resolve began to crumble. The house, her sanctuary, the symbol of everything she had fought for, stood in front of her like a cold, indifferent monument to failure. She stepped out of the car, feeling an unsettling weight in her chest. As she approached the front door, something caught her eye, a stark, official notice tacked to the doorframe. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the words. A repossession notice from the bank. Her world began to tilt on its axis, the ground beneath her feet feeling suddenly unstable. The harsh letters blurred in front of her eyes, and the realization hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't a game. This was real. Andrew's warning had been no bluff. Her breath caught in her throat as her legs seemed to weaken beneath her. She stumbled forward, her mind racing, trying to process the full weight of what was happening. The house, the home she had worked so hard to secure, was being taken away from her. The life she had built, the promises she had made to herself, were being ripped out from under her with a cold, bureaucratic finality. For a moment, the world around her seemed to go still. The noise of the street, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Everything faded into the background as she stood frozen, trying to catch her breath, trying to deny the crushing reality. Before she could gather herself, a voice broke through her daze. "Ma'am," the man said, his tone impassive, but the words were a cruel punctuation to her nightmare. "I need the keys." Catherine blinked, her mind struggling to make sense of his presence. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible as she tried to cling to some shred of control. "The car's been repossessed as well. Please, the keys, the man repeated, his hand outstretched. Her stomach churned violently as the reality of her situation began to sink in. Repossessed? She couldn't understand how everything had slipped through her fingers so quickly. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her purse, the keys slipping from her grasp and falling into his hand with a finality that felt like a death sentence. Her vision blurred, her knees buckling as she sank to the cold concrete driveway. The tears came suddenly, hot and relentless, streaming down her face as she realized the full scope of her fall from grace. She had no power left, no control. Desperation clawed at her chest, and instinctively, she reached for her phone. She called James, her thumb pressing his name with urgency, as if the simple act of dialing could somehow pull her out of the abyss. The rings echoed in her ear, each one an unanswered plea for help. After several rings, his voicemail greeted her, cold and indifferent. She tried again, her fingers trembling with anxiety. Another round of rings, followed by the same void. And then, the phone switched off entirely. No answer, no explanation, nothing. Catherine felt a sharp pang of isolation, the reality of her abandonment setting in. She was utterly alone, stranded in the wreckage of a life she had once taken for granted. The man with the keys had left, the car now taken from her, and her home was no longer hers. Her mind reeled, her body racked with sobs as she remained kneeling on the cold, unforgiving concrete. The life she had built with James, everything she had worked for, was slipping away, and there was no one left to catch her. Catherine's sobs grew louder and more desperate as she sat there on the cold, unforgiving concrete, her body racked with helplessness. Every emotion she had fought to suppress over the past weeks, fear, anger, sorrow, came crashing down on her all at once. She knew, with an awful clarity, that everything had spiraled beyond her control. The weight of the situation bore down on her chest, each sob a painful reminder of her shattered reality. Just as she thought she couldn't bear the agony any longer, the sound of approaching footsteps broke through the haze of her despair. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes struggling to focus, and saw the familiar figures of James' parents, Richard and Evelyn, walking toward her. Their expressions were grim, their concern palpable as they took in the sight of the family's crumbling empire. Evelyn was the first to reach her, kneeling beside Catherine with a softness that contrasted sharply with the harshness of the moment. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around Catherine, offering what little comfort she could, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. Catherine clung to her, the weight of everything threatening to overwhelm her. Richard, standing a few feet away, watched them with a somber expression. His face was drawn, aged by years of stress, but it was the look in his eyes that struck Catherine the most: anger, disappointment, and a profound sense of helplessness. He had always been the pillar of the family, but now he stood there like a shadow of the man she once knew. James? Richard muttered under his breath, his voice heavy with disbelief. How could he let it get this far? His words seemed more like a painful admission of failure than a question, as if he had seen the signs for some time but never allowed himself to acknowledge them. Evelyn sniffled softly as she pulled away from Catherine, her gaze turning to her husband with a deep, unsettled worry. "We need to call James. Find out what the hell is going on," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and frustration. Richard nodded, his hand shaking slightly as he pulled out his phone. He dialed James's number, his gaze never leaving the repossession notice still hanging on the door. The phone rang, each tone feeling like a hammer striking the final nail in the coffin of their family's fortunes. But there was no answer. Evelyn's face darkened with worry. She tried once more, then again, but it became clear. James wasn't picking up. His phone was either off, or he was deliberately ignoring them. Her heart pounded in her chest, a sense of panic rising within her. Then, as if grasping at any lifeline, she pulled out her own phone and dialed another number, one she had never imagined she would call again. "Andrew," Evelyn's voice wavered with a mix of hope and desperation as the phone connected. "I need help. James is missing, and the bank has taken everything we have. I don't know what's happening. James isn't answering his phone." And her voice cracked, her words faltering as the gravity of the situation hit her fully. "You think I care?" Andrew's voice was like ice, slicing through the heavy silence. Each word dripped with disdain, the weight of his fury palpable. "You really think I give a damn about your golden boy or our parents, who've been blind and biased my whole life?" Evelyn's breath faltered, her chest tightening as she braced herself for the storm she knew was brewing. She reached out, her voice trembling, desperate to hold the fraying threads of the conversation. Andrew, please, we've lost everything. And you? You've taken everything from us? Andrew's bitter laugh cut her off sharply, echoing in the space between them. His voice rose, brimming with a venomous edge. Lost everything? No, you lost everything the day you decided I didn't matter. The day you chose to betray me. He took a step closer, his presence imposing, his tone harsh and unrelenting. Do you even understand what that did to me? You and your precious James, you never cared about me. Not for a single second. I walked out of that house, disappeared into nothingness, and not one of you bothered to ask if I was dead or alive. Not you, not our father. No one. Evelyn's eyes welled with tears, her lips quivering as she tried to interject, but Andrew silenced her with a furious gesture. You didn't care. You never cared. His voice cracked, the anger beneath it threatening to boil over. Not when I was drowning, not when I was breaking apart. You were too busy coddling James, your perfect, faultless James. His voice turned mocking, the bitterness unrelenting. You watched, as he walked all over me. You didn't say a damn word as he stole my wife, dismantled my life piece by piece, and left me with nothing. Evelyn flinched at the rawness of his words, her mind racing to find a way to soothe the festering wounds in front of her. Andrew, we didn't. But he was relentless, his eyes blazing with a fire that refused to be extinguished. You didn't have to do anything, Evelyn. That's the problem. You stood by and let it all happen. You praised him while you shoved me aside like I was invisible. You made me feel like I was nothing. When I left, you didn't even stop to wonder why. You didn't try to find me, didn't care what became of me. You thought I was disposable. His words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding, leaving Evelyn reeling as guilt and anguish threatened to consume her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. There was nothing left to say that could undo the damage. Andrew's voice deepened, each word laced with venom. Look at you now. Your perfect little family? It's gone. Your house, your money, everything you held so dear. It's all gone. And do you know why? Because of your precious son. The one you idolized, the one you refused to see for what he truly was. The same one who destroyed me and, in the end, destroyed you too. Evelyn's lips trembled as she struggled to speak, her voice catching in her throat. Andrew, please. But he silenced her with a cold, bitter laugh, his words cutting through her like a blade. Don't bother. You had your chance to listen. You had years to see what was happening, to see the damage James caused. But you didn't. You turned a blind eye, ignored me, and let it all happen. And now you want to talk? Now, when your world is falling apart. His words grew sharper, each one striking with unrelenting precision. You're responsible for all of this, Evelyn. You and your husband made me the man I am today. You think I should help you now? Save you from the mess you created? Too bad. While you were busy pretending everything was perfect in your little bubble, I was out there building an empire. Brick by brick, I built something from the ashes of the life you let crumble. And guess what? I don't need you. I don't need any of you anymore. Evelyn felt her knees weaken, her heart pounding in her chest. Andrew, please, don't do this. I'm begging you. We're family. Andrew's voice dropped, chillingly calm but with a razor-sharp edge. Family? He let out a derisive chuckle, the sound void of any warmth. You and your husband are dead to me. Nothing more than shadows of a past I left behind. You want to fix this? You want salvation? Look to your golden boy, Evelyn. He's the one who can dig you out of the pit you've dug for yourselves. Not me. Evelyn's hand trembled as she clutched the phone, her knuckles white. Her throat tightened, and no words came. She could only listen as Andrew's words sank deep, each one hitting like a hammer to her chest. There was a long, heavy silence, the weight of it pressing down on her like a storm cloud. Then Andrew's voice came through one last time, quiet yet resolute. Good luck, Evelyn. You'll need it. The line went dead with a finality that left her paralyzed. She stared at the phone in her hand, her face pale and her breath shallow. The truth of Andrew's words hung in the air like a noose tightening around her. All she could do was stand there, helpless, as the enormity of her family's collapse washed over her like a tidal wave. 7 days later, I heard the news. James was dead. It spread quickly, as news like that always does, but the details were as bleak as they were predictable. They found him in the middle of the desert, sprawled lifeless on the cracked, unforgiving earth. Alone. A fitting end, I suppose, for someone who spent his life basking in the glow of everyone else's praise, only to find that when the lights went out, no one stayed by his side. An empty bottle lay next to him, its label worn and faded from the relentless desert sun. The coroner said it was an overdose. A tragic end to a tragic life. That's what they called it. But I knew better. James didn't stumble into tragedy. He courted it, played with it, until it finally turned on him. What was he even doing out there? So far from everything and everyone. Running? Searching? Trying to escape the weight of his own failures? No one could say for sure, but I could imagine it. The panic, the desperation, the final moments when he realized he was utterly alone. There was no one left to save him, no golden pedestal to prop him up. The world had moved on, and so had I. Back home, the collapse of my parents was just as inevitable. Once perched in their grand mansion, they now lived in a decrepit house on the outskirts of town. The place was a wreck, boarded up windows, weeds swallowing the yard, the walls barely holding themselves together. It was almost poetic, really. The house reflected their pride, once shining and untouchable, now crumbling under the weight of their arrogance and denial. I'd driven past it once, out of morbid curiosity, and couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. They'd clung to their luxury, their status, for so long, but now all of that was gone. Just like James, they'd bet everything on a lie, and when it all fell apart, they were left with nothing but memories of what used to be. And then there was Catherine. Oh, how far she'd fallen. Once the queen of James's world, the trophy wife with a dazzling smile and looks that could stop traffic. Now, she worked at a dingy local bar, pouring drinks for men who didn't even bother to hide their contempt. I'd gone there once, sat in the corner, just to see for myself. The years hadn't been kind to her, and it showed. The glow she used to have was long gone, replaced by the tired, worn look of someone who had nothing left to fight for. The men laughed at her, made crude comments, treated her like she was nothing more than a sideshow. And the worst part? She took it. She smiled. She played along, because she had no choice. It was almost sad, watching her like that. Almost. But then I remembered how she used to look at me, the disdain in her eyes, the way she clung to James as if his shadow alone could shield her from the world. I remembered how she laughed when I walked away, convinced I'd never amount to anything without their approval. Now look at her. Look at them all. James is dead. My parents are rotting in their own self-made prison, and Catherine is just another broken shell, clinging to scraps in a world that doesn't care. And me? I'm still standing. Stronger, better, unshackled from the weight of their expectations and betrayals. They thought they could break me, but they only sharpened my edges. Watching them fall isn't revenge. It's justice. Catherine had hoped, maybe even prayed, for some kind of escape, but all she found was humiliation. Night after night, she stood behind the bar, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of her new reality was crushing her. The men who came in treated her with contempt, their words like knives. Old and ugly, they sneered, their mocking laughter cutting deeper than any insult ever could. She had no choice but to endure it. What else could she do? There were no other options left for her, no lifeline to pull her from the wreckage. This dingy bar was all she had now, a dim, smoke-filled pit of stale beer and bad decisions. A far cry from the life she'd once flaunted, the life of luxury and comfort she clung to so tightly. I wondered if she ever thought about those days, if she looked back and saw how far she'd fallen, if she realized that the pedestal she'd stood on had been built on the backs of others. On my back. The court case for the kids wasn't even a fight. I filed for full custody, and the judge didn't hesitate. Catherine had no stable home, no income beyond the tips she scraped together, and no ability to care for them. She had nothing to offer them but chaos, and the court saw that as clearly as I did. And the kids? They were happy, relieved, even. They'd seen what I'd gone through for them, how hard I fought to give them a better life. They knew I wasn't perfect, but they also knew I loved them and wanted the best for them. When they moved in, I made sure they felt it. My home became their home, a place where they were safe, respected, and loved. It wasn't about spoiling them or trying to win their affection. It was about giving them the stability they'd been denied for so long. I watched as they began to thrive, their burdens slowly lifting. Their schoolwork improved, their laughter became genuine, and they started to dream again. They joined clubs, picked up hobbies, and began building the kind of lives they deserved. Looking back, I can't say I wasn't angry at Catherine, at James, at my parents, for the damage they caused. But that anger didn't rule me anymore. It didn't define me. My focus was on the future, on my kids, on making sure they had the love and support that had been so scarce in their lives before. Catherine might have lost everything, but I gained something more valuable than all the wealth and status in the world. The chance to give my children a life filled with love, respect, and hope. And in the end, that's all that mattered. Catherine had always been stubborn, always carried herself like the world owed her something. Even after everything fell apart, that fire in her refused to go out, though now, it burned her more than anyone else. I'd heard about her working at the bar, scraping by on tips, her life stripped down to the barest bones of survival. I'd even felt a twinge of pity once, fleeting as it was. But it was her life. Her choices had led her there, and I wasn't about to let her drag me back into her mess. One day, Marina and I were at a little cafe downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just a place we liked to go to catch a break from the chaos of life. I remember the way she laughed that day, the kind of laugh that made you forget the rest of the world existed. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, like I'd finally left all the pain and bitterness behind. And then I saw Catherine. She spotted us from across the street, and before I could even register the look on her face, she was storming toward us, her heels clacking against the pavement like gunfire. I could see the fury etched into her features, the way her eyes locked onto me with a mix of anger and desperation. "Andrew," she shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the chatter of the cafe. Heads turned, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. "How dare you move on so easily? You think you can just forget everything? Forget me? Forget your family?" I put my coffee down and looked up at her, keeping my expression calm. "Catherine," I said evenly, "I don't want to do this. I've moved on. You should too." But she wasn't interested in civility. "You think you're so much better than me now, don't you?" She spat, her voice rising with every word. "You took everything from me. Everything." Her hands trembled as she stepped closer, her face twisted with rage. I could see the way Marina tensed beside me, her eyes flicking between Catherine and me, her jaw tightening. I reached out instinctively, a gesture meant to keep her grounded, but before I could say anything else, Catherine lunged forward. Her hand shot up, aiming for my face, but she didn't get the chance to land the blow. In a flash, Marina was on her feet, stepping between us like a shield. "Enough," Marina said, her voice calm but firm, like steel wrapped in silk. "You don't get to do this." Catherine froze, her hands still raised, and for a moment, it looked like the fight had drained out of her. But then she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "Who do you think you are?" She hissed at Marina. "You don't know anything about us? About what he's done." Marina didn't flinch. "I know enough," she said, her gaze steady. "I know he's moved on, and you should too. Whatever you're looking for, Catherine, you're not going to find it here." "Enough, Catherine," Marina said, her voice cutting through the chaos with an icy calmness that demanded attention. But Catherine was beyond reason, her face contorted with fury. "Stay out of this, you bitch," she snarled, lunging forward to shove Marina away. It happened in an instant. Before Catherine could lay a hand on her, Marina stepped aside and, with the precision and composure of someone who had spent years training, grabbed Catherine's wrist. In a fluid motion, she spun Catherine around, guiding her momentum and pinning her to the ground with an ease that spoke volumes about her skill. The cafe patrons gasped, their attention now fully riveted on the scene unfolding before them. Marina, a seasoned MMA champion, wasn't just reacting. She was protecting. Her movements were deliberate, her focus unwavering. No one threatened Andrew, not in her presence. Not after all they had been through together. Catherine struggled beneath her, trying to wriggle free, but Marina's grip was unrelenting. The pressure on Catherine's twisted arm forced her to stop thrashing, a sharp gasp escaping her lips as pain replaced her fury. Marina leaned down slightly, her tone steady but laced with unmistakable authority. "You're lucky I'm showing you mercy," she said, her voice low and even. "If I wasn't, you'd leave here in much worse shape." Catherine's protests dissolved into silence as Marina released her, standing tall and composed as Catherine clambered to her feet. The once proud woman now looked disheveled and humiliated, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She staggered back a few steps, nursing her wrist and glaring at Marina before limping away, her bruised ego dragging her down even more than her physical pain. The cafe buzzed with murmurs, and Andrew exhaled slowly, rising to his feet. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly, though there was a flicker of admiration in his tone. "Yes, I did," Marina replied, her eyes meeting his. "No one lays a hand on you. Not her, not anyone." Catherine, however, wasn't finished with her vendetta. Seething from the confrontation, she marched straight to the police station, spinning a story about an unprovoked assault. She painted herself as the victim, tearfully recounting how Marina had supposedly attacked her without cause. She demanded justice, convinced that she would regain some semblance of power through the legal system. But Catherine's narrative quickly unraveled when the cafe's security footage was reviewed. The recording told the real story. Catherine aggressively approaching Andrew, attempting to slap him, and then turning her ire on Marina. The footage showed Marina's composed yet decisive actions, clearly in self-defense, as Catherine's aggression escalated. In court, the judge reviewed the evidence, their expression stern as they addressed Catherine. "The video clearly shows you were the aggressor in this incident," the judge declared. Marina's actions were not only justified, but restrained under the circumstances. This case is dismissed. The judge's gavel struck the bench with a sharp finality, silencing the murmurs in the courtroom. He turned his stern gaze toward Catherine, his voice firm and unwavering. "Ms. Catherine Lewis," the judge began, his tone dripping with disapproval, "your behavior in this matter has been nothing short of reprehensible. The evidence presented here today not only exonerates Marina, but also reveals a pattern of aggression and vindictiveness on your part. This is not the conduct of someone seeking justice, but rather the actions of an individual intent on causing harm and disruption." Catherine flinched as the judge continued, his words slicing through the remnants of her pride. "Let me make this abundantly clear. Any further attempts to engage with Mr. Andrew Carter, his fiancée Marina, or their children will not be tolerated. You are hereby ordered to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from them at all times. This restraining order is effective immediately and will remain in place indefinitely. Violating it will result in severe legal consequences." The courtroom was silent save for the scribbling of the stenographer's keys. Catherine's face burned with humiliation, her eyes cast downward as the weight of the judge's reprimand settled over her. She felt the stares of those present, their judgment as palpable as the walls closing in around her. Her mind raced, replaying the events that had led her to this moment. Catherine had once been a woman admired and envied, living a life of privilege and ease. But now, she sat before a judge, stripped of her dignity, her actions laid bare for all to see. Her attempts to cling to the past, to disrupt Andrew's newfound happiness, had only further highlighted the depths to which she had fallen. As the judge's gavel struck again, signaling the end of the hearing, Catherine rose from her seat, her movements slow and deliberate. Her humiliation was complete, and there was no one left to blame but herself. She had squandered every opportunity, burned every bridge, and alienated the very people she once considered her family. Walking out of the courtroom, Catherine avoided the eyes of the onlookers, her head bowed in shame. For the first time, the reality of her situation hit her with full force. She was alone, isolated by her own choices, and the path to redemption, if it even existed, seemed impossibly far away. Marina's name was cleared, and Catherine was left with nothing but the weight of her own actions to bear. Andrew and Marina walked out of the courtroom together, his arm around her shoulders. "That was a lot," Andrew said, glancing at her. Marina gave him a small smile, her confidence unshaken. She needed to learn that there are consequences. Marina remained a steadfast presence in Andrew's life, her unwavering support helping to solidify the foundation of their future together. When they exchanged vows in a quiet, intimate ceremony, surrounded only by close friends and family, it was a moment of profound healing and renewal. For Andrew, it wasn't just about finding love again. It was about building a new chapter on his own terms, free from the chaos and pain of the past. Marina seamlessly became a part of Andrew's family, embracing her role not just as a wife, but as a mentor and guide for his children. With her background in martial arts, she began teaching the kids discipline, self-respect, and the confidence to stand tall in the face of adversity. What started as casual lessons in self-defense soon became a cherished routine, with Marina instilling values that extended far beyond physical training. The children thrived under her care, their once shaken spirits growing stronger with each passing day. They learned not only how to defend themselves, but also the importance of perseverance, integrity, and kindness. Marina's lessons became a cornerstone of their growth, helping them find stability and purpose in a world that had once seemed so uncertain. Andrew watched it all with a deep sense of gratitude and pride. For the first time in years, his life felt complete, full of love, laughter, and the promise of a brighter future. Together, he and Marina created a home where the kids felt safe and cherished, a far cry from the toxic environment they had endured before. As for Catherine, her life had become a stark contrast. The vibrant, confident woman she once was had faded into obscurity, replaced by someone consumed by regret and bitterness. Isolated and alone, she could only watch from afar as Andrew and his family moved forward, their happiness a painful reminder of everything she had lost. Each decision Catherine had made, each bridge she had burned, had led her further down a path of loneliness and despair. And now, as she sat in the quiet of her small, empty apartment, the weight of her choices bore down on her. She was no longer the center of anyone's world, no longer admired or envied. Andrew, however, refused to dwell on the past. With Marina by his side, he focused on building a legacy defined by love and resilience. The two of them became partners in every sense of the word, their lives interwoven with a shared purpose, to create a family and a future where the scars of the past no longer dictated their present. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.